I never thought a simple gate could hold so much power. For years, my cabin sat quietly at the edge of Pine Hollow, surrounded by towering pines and the kind of peace only deep in the forest can provide. My neighbors, well, neighbors is generous. Most were part-time residents, respected my space, and I respected theirs. But that peace shattered one crisp October morning when I discovered the HOA had sealed my cabin gate. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I parked my old pickup in the gravel driveway and approached the gate, keys jingling in my hand, ready to unlock it. But no amount of jiggling or pleading with the rusted lock would budge it. A bright orange notice had been stapled to the wooden post, fluttering in the autumn wind. Access prohibited. Unauthorized gate. Violation of HOA regulations. That's all it said. No explanation, no warning, no conversation. I stared at the notice, incredulous. My gate had been there for decades, long before the HOA even existed. It had never interfered with anyone's property or access. In fact, it was a private safety measure. But apparently, regulations now ruled over common sense. I fumed, but mostly I worried. Because as I looked around, I realized something horrifying. The only road out of Pine Hollow for some residents ran across my land. Literally, the cabin behind. Me had no other access. My gate controlled their freedom without me ever knowing it. I tried calling the HOA immediately. I left messages with the manager, emailed the board members, even visited the office in town. The response was mechanical, cold, and bureaucratic. Your gate is in violation. You must comply immediately. Thank you. No empathy? No acknowledgement that their actions stranded people on my land. It was as if the world had shifted, and I'd woken up in someone else's nightmare. By noon, neighbors began appearing, pacing nervously along the locked path. Some were panicked, others furious. They demanded explanations I couldn't provide. One elderly couple, who relied on my land to reach their cabin, shook their heads in disbelief. "We never thought it would come to this," the man muttered, hands trembling. "We always assumed you'd never block the road." I wanted to tell them the truth, that I hadn't blocked anything, but my voice faltered. Because technically the HOA had done it. So there I stood, caught between my rights as a landowner and the chaos unleashed by a group of people who claimed authority over land that wasn't theirs. My cabin had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was facing a fight that could change everything about life in Pine Hollow. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the driveway. I knew then that tomorrow I would confront the HOA, but I also knew this wouldn't be just about a gate. It would be about control, ownership, and who really held the power in this little slice of the forest. The next morning, I drove down the winding path to the HOA office, my old pickup rattling like it had a mind of its own. The office, a modest brick building tucked between a convenience store and a gas station, looked deceptively calm. But I could feel tension thickening in the air like fog. Behind the glass doors, a secretary greeted me with a polite, rehearsed smile. I tried to return it, but my frustration refused to hide. "I need to speak to someone about the gate at my cabin," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's blocked, and people literally can't leave their properties." She nodded, tapped something on her computer, and sighed. "The board isn't in today, but I can leave a message." "I need answers today," I said, trying to push the edge of panic out of my voice. "It's urgent. People are trapped. This isn't just a minor rule issue." She hesitated, glanced at a closed office door, and then relented. "Wait here." A few minutes later, a man in a crisp navy blazer emerged, clipboard in hand. His expression was that practiced mix of authority and indifference. "You're the landowner of the cabin with the blocked gate?" he asked. "Yes. And your HOA sealed it? Did you know that some residents can only exit through my property?" I felt my patience fraying. He tapped his clipboard, eyes skimming lines I couldn't read. "We're following protocol. The gate violates subdivision regulations. You're supposed to have applied for a permit." I swallowed. "Permit? My gate has existed for over 20 years. 20 years before this HOA even existed. And you didn't notify me before sealing it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Procedures don't require prior notification in urgent compliance cases." My blood ran cold. urgent compliance. My neighbors were stranded because of procedures. I could feel the tension in the room shift. Something in me snapped. The need to stay polite evaporated. You realize you've trapped people on my land, right? That's not compliance. That's negligence. This could be dangerous. He leaned back, crossing his arms. We understand your concern, but rules are rules. You'll need to file an appeal to have the gate reopened. I wanted to scream. Appeal? While my neighbors waited helplessly? But there was nothing I could do in that moment. I left the office with a sinking feeling. The HOA's bureaucracy was a wall, and I was standing on the other side with my hands pressed against cold, unyielding concrete. Driving back, I watched the autumn leaves swirl in the wind, thinking of the people pacing behind my gate. They were innocent in this mess, caught between my property rights and the HOA's inflexible rules. I knew then that this wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. It was about defending my land, my neighbors, and the principle that power should not be exercised without responsibility. By the time I reached my cabin, the first twilight shadows were stretching across the locked gate. I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't wait for the HOA to act. If they refused to acknowledge the consequences of their actions, I would take matters into my own hands. The forest around me whispered its silent warning. Some fights are bigger than gates, and sometimes defending what's right means standing alone. By sunrise, the atmosphere around my cabin had shifted from anxiety to quiet determination. Word had spread overnight that the gate was sealed, and more neighbors trickled in, some carrying supplies, others just pacing nervously. I realized that while I had been furious at the HOA, the people trapped behind my land were the real victims. I needed to act, but carefully. This was more than a simple confrontation. I stepped outside and raised my voice. Everyone, listen. I know this is frustrating, and I know it's inconvenient, but panicking won't help. We need a plan. A few heads turned toward me, relief flickering in their eyes. For a moment, I saw the trust they had placed in me, and it hit me just how much responsibility had landed in my lap. The first thing I did was assess the situation. There were 4 cabins fully blocked, each family unable to access their vehicles or even leave for emergencies. I made a quick walk around my property, checking the edges, noting that while my land was technically private, the old logging path behind the trees could serve as a temporary exit if cleared. The problem was that cutting through trees and mud wasn't exactly simple. I rounded everyone up near the gate. We're going to make a temporary path, I said. Nothing permanent yet. Just enough so people can get out safely. We'll work together, carefully. Murmurs of agreement rose. They looked at me with cautious hope, and I felt a mix of pride and pressure. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about responsibility, and how quickly bureaucracy could turn into real-life danger. We started moving supplies, ropes, shovels, and old planks I had stored for cabin repairs. Children were kept at a safe distance while adults dug and cleared brush. It was exhausting, physically and mentally, but something remarkable began to happen. A community was forming. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now communicating, planning, sharing resources. We were united by frustration, yes, but also by necessity. By midday, a narrow, rough path had been carved around my gate. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't approved by the HOA, but it was functional. Cars squeezed through one by one with careful guidance. Shouts of encouragement echoed as neighbors helped each other navigate the tricky turns. Relief was palpable. People hugged, thanked me, and even laughed at the absurdity of the situation. But as I watched them leave, a cold realization crept in. This was a temporary fix. The HOA could retaliate at any moment. They could fine me, take legal action, or even attempt to block the path again. The gate had been sealed once, and they clearly didn't care about human consequences. I stood alone at my gate after everyone had gone, looking at the remnants of our makeshift path. The sun was high now, casting stark shadows across the yard. I knew that if I wanted a permanent solution, I'd have to confront the HOA directly. And this time, I couldn't rely on polite requests. It was time to escalate, to protect my land and my neighbors, no matter what obstacles they put in my way. The following morning, I felt a sense of urgency that I couldn't ignore. The temporary path we had carved around the gate worked, but it was a band-aid on a wound that threatened to fester. I needed a permanent solution, one that protected my rights and ensured my neighbors wouldn't be trapped again. I spent the early hours drafting a letter to the HOA, outlining not only the history of the gate, but the fact that the only accessible road for several properties crossed my land. I attached photographs, maps, and detailed accounts of the chaos caused by their abrupt action. After delivering the letter to their office in person, I didn't expect an immediate resolution. The board members were notorious for their rigid adherence to rules without considering the human consequences. But I had another plan, a meeting, public and recorded, with as many affected neighbors as possible. I wanted witnesses, accountability, and pressure. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at the HOA office. Residents shared stories of being stranded, missed appointments, and even near emergencies. The HOA representatives arrived, expressions carefully neutral, though I could see faint traces of discomfort. They began reading their prepared statements, talking about bylaws, permits, and compliance regulations. But I didn't let them finish. I stepped forward. You've created a dangerous situation. You ignored the fact that people rely on my land for access. Rules don't matter if they endanger lives. You can't act like human consequences don't exist. My voice rang louder than I expected. Fueled by frustration and the responsibility I felt for those stranded behind the gate. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, their composure cracked. They asked if there was an alternative solution. I laid out what we had already done, the temporary path, and explained that with proper planning, the gate could remain while ensuring access for all residents. The neighbors nodded behind me, their presence a silent but powerful support. After tense negotiations and several hours, the HOA reluctantly agreed to unseal my gate, provided I submit an official permit and follow minimal safety regulations. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, they still got to enforce rules, but it was enough. My land, my authority, and the safety of my neighbors were finally recognized. Driving back to my cabin, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The sun dipped low, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. I stopped at the gate, ran my hand along the familiar wood, and realized that while a gate is just wood and metal, it represents something far larger. Boundaries, rights, and the delicate balance between community and individuality. That night, as the wind whispered through the pines, I sat on my porch, listening to the quiet hum of restored peace. The fight had been difficult, but it had reminded me, and everyone in Pine Hollow, that even in small communities, standing up for what's right matters. And sometimes, the right fight begins with a simple gate. Enjoying this deep dive into the Pine Hollow cabin saga? Hit that subscribe button to follow more real-life stories of standing up for your rights and navigating unexpected challenges. Also, give this a like if you found the story gripping, and drop a comment below. How would you react if an HOA suddenly blocked your only road out?